Tomorrow. Not a sound. What's wrong with the kid? A bowl of yellow wine in his hand, red nosed Kung jerked his head towards the next house as he spoke. Blue skinned Awu sat next to his own bowl and punched the other hard in the back. Bah, he glowed thickly, going sentimental again. Being so out of the way, Lǔ Xùn was rather old fashioned. Folks closed their doors and went to bed before the first watch sounded. By midnight, there were only two households awake: Prosperity Tavern, where a few gluttons guzzled merrily round the bar, and the house next door, where Fourth Shun's wife lived. For left a widow 2 years earlier, she had nothing but the cotton yarn she spun to support herself and her 3 years old boy. This is why she also slept late. It was a fact that for several days now there had been no sound of spinning. But since there were only two households awake at midnight, old Kung and the others were naturally the only ones who could notice if there was any sound from Fourth Shun's wife's house, and the only ones to notice if there was no sound. After being punched, old Kung, looking quite at ease, took a great swig at his wine and piped up a folk tune. Meanwhile, Fourth Shun's wife was sitting on the edge of her bed, Pao her treasure in her arms, while her loom stood silent on the floor. The murky lamplight fell on Pao Er's face, which showed livid beneath a feverish flush. I have drawn lots before this shrine, she was thinking. I have made a vow to the gods. He's taken the guaranteed cure. If he still doesn't get better, what can I do? I shall have to take him to Dr. Ho Xiao Sin. But maybe Pao Er is only bad at night. When the sun comes out tomorrow, his fever may go and he may breathe more easily again. A lot of illnesses are like that. Fourth Shun's wife was a simple woman who did not know what a fearful word but is. Thanks to this but, many bad things turn out well, many good things turn out badly. A summer night is short. Soon after old Kung and the others stopped singing, the sky grew bright in the east. And presently, through the cracks in the window, filtered the silvery light of dawn. Waiting for the dawn was not such a simple matter for Fourth Shun's wife as for other people. The time dragged terribly slowly. Each breath Pao took seemed to last at least a year. But now at last it was bright. Clear daylight swallowed up the lamplight. Pao nostril quivered as he gasped for breath. Fourth Shun's wife smothered a cry, for she knew that this boded ill. But what could she do? She wondered. Her only hope was to take him to Dr. Ho Shi. Might be a simple woman, but she had a will of her own. She stood up, went to the cupboard, and took out her entire savings, 13 small silver dollars and 180 coppers in all. Having put the whole lot in her pocket, she locked the door and carried Pao as fast as she could to Dr. Ho's house. Early as it was, there were already 4 patients sitting there. She produced 40 silver cents for a registration slip, and Pao was the 5th to be seen. Dr. Ho stretched out 2 fingers to feel the child's pulses. His nails were a good 4 inches long, and Fourth Shun's wife marveled inwardly, thinking, surely my Pao must be fated to live. She could not help feeling anxious all the same, and could not stop herself asking nervously, "What's wrong with my power, doctor?" "An obstruction of the digestive tract." "Is it serious? Will he?" "Take these two prescriptions to start with." "He can't breathe, his nostrils are twitching." The element of fire overpowers that of metal. Leaving this sentence unfinished, Dr. Ho closed his eyes, and fourth Shun's wife did not like to say any more. Opposite the doctor sat a man in his 30s who had now finished making out the prescription. "The first is infant preserver pills," he told her, pointing to the characters in one corner of the paper. "You can get those only at the Shia family's Salvation Shop." Fourth Shun's wife took the paper and walked out, thinking as she went. She might be a simple woman, but she knew Dr. Ho's house. Salvation Shop and her own home formed a triangle. So, of course, it would be simpler to buy the medicine first before going back. She hurried as fast as she could to Salvation Shop. The assistant raised his long fingernails too as he slowly read the prescription. Then slowly wrapped up the medicine. With Pao in her arms, fourth Shun's wife waited. Suddenly Pao stretched up a little hand and tugged at his loose tuft of hair. He had never done this before, and his mother was terrified. The sun was fairly high now. With the child in her arms and the package of medicine to carry, the further she walked, the heavier she found her load. The child kept struggling too, which made the way seem even longer. She had to sit down on the doorstep of a big house by the roadside to rest for a while. And presently her clothes lay so clammy against her skin that she realized she had been sweating. But Pao seemed fast asleep. When she stood up again to walk slowly on, she still found him too heavy. A voice beside her said, "Let me take him for you, fourth Shun's wife." It sounded like blue-skinned Ah Woo. When she looked up, sure enough it was Ah Woo who was following her with eyes still heavy from sleep. Though fourth Shun's wife had been longing for an angel to come to her rescue, she had not wanted her champion to be Ah Woo. But there was something of the gallant about Ah Woo, for he absolutely insisted on helping her, and at last, after several refusals, she gave way. As he stretched his arm between her breast and the child, then thrust it down to take over Pao, she felt a wave of heat along her breast. She flushed right up to her ears. They walked along, 2.5 feet apart. Ah Woo made some remarks, most of which were left unanswered by fourth Shun's wife. They had not gone far when he gave the child back to her, saying he had arranged yesterday to have a meal at this time with a friend. Fourth Shun's wife took Pao back. Luckily, it wasn't far now. Already she could see ninth Aunt Wong sitting at the side of the street, calling out to her. "Fourth Shun's wife, how's the child? Did you get to see the doctor?" "We saw him, ninth Aunt Wong. You are old and you have seen a lot. Will you look him over for me and say what you think?" Well, When ninth Aunt Wong had examined Pao she nodded her head twice, then shook it twice. By the time Pao had taken his medicine, it was afternoon. Fourth Shun's wife watched him closely, and he did seem a good deal quieter. In the afternoon, he suddenly opened his eyes and called, "Ma." Then he closed his eyes again and seemed to be sleeping. He had not slept long before his forehead and the tip of his nose were beaded with sweat, which, when his mother felt it, stuck to her fingers like glue. In a panic, she felt his chest, then burst out sobbing. After quieting down, his breathing had stopped completely. After sobbing, she started wailing. Soon, groups of people gathered inside the room. Ninth Aunt Wong, blue-skinned Awu, and the like. Outside, others like the landlord of Prosperity Tavern and red-nosed Kong. Ninth Aunt Wang decreed that a string of paper coins should be burnt. Then, taking 2 stools and 5 articles of clothing as security, she borrowed $2 for Fourth Shun's wife to prepare a meal for all those who were helping. The first problem was the coffin. Fourth Shun's wife still had a pair of silver earrings and a silver hairpin plated with gold, which she gave to the landlord of Prosperity Tavern so that he would go surety for her and buy a coffin, half of cash, half on credit. Blue-skinned Awu raised his hand to volunteer to help, but Ninth Aunt Wang would not hear of it. All she would let him do was carry the coffin the next day. Old bitch, he cursed and stood there grumpily pursing his lips. The landlord left, coming back that evening to report that the coffin would have to be specially made and would not be ready till nearly morning. By the time the landlord came back, the other helpers had finished their meal, and Lǔ Xùn, being rather old-fashioned, they all went home to sleep before the first watch. Only Ah Wu leant on the bar of Prosperity Tavern drinking, while old Kong croaked a song. Meanwhile, Fourth Shun's wife was sitting on the edge of the bed, crying. Pao lay on the bed and the loom stood silent on the floor. After a long time, when Fourth Shun's wife had no more tears to shed, she opened wide her eyes and looked around in amazement. All this was impossible. This is only a dream, she thought. It is all a dream. I shall wake up tomorrow lying snug in bed, with Pao sleeping snugly beside me. Then he'll wake and call Ma and jump down like a young tiger to play. Old Kung had long since stopped singing, and the light had gone out in Prosperity Tavern. Fourth Shun's wife sat staring, but could not believe all that had happened. A cock crew, the sky grew bright in the east, and through the cracks in the window filtered the silvery light of dawn. By degrees, the silvery light of dawn turned copper, and the sun shone on the roof. Fourth Shun's wife sat there, staring till someone knocked, when she gave a start and ran to open the door. A stranger was there with something on his back, and behind him stood Ninth Aunt Wang. Oh, it was the coffin he had bought. Not till that afternoon was the lid of the coffin put on, because Fourth Shun's wife would keep crying, then taking a look, and could not bear to have the lid closed down. Luckily, Ninth Aunt Wang grew tired of waiting, hurried indignantly forward and pulled her aside. Then they hastily closed it up. Fourth Shun's wife had really done all she could for her Pao. Nothing had been forgotten. The previous day she had burned a string of paper coins. This morning she had burned the 49 books of the Incantation of Great Mercy. And before putting him in the coffin, she had dressed him in his newest clothes and set by his pillow all the toys he liked best. A little clay figure, 2 small wooden bowls, 2 glass bottles. Though Ninth Aunt Wang reckoned carefully on her fingers, even then she could not think of anything they had forgotten. Since blue-skinned Ah Wu did not turn up all day, the landlord of Prosperity Tavern hired 2 porters for Fourth Shun's wife at 210 large copper each. who carried the coffin to the public graveyard and dug a grave. Ninth Aunt Wang helped her prepare a meal to which everyone who had lifted a finger or opened his mouth was invited. Soon the sun made it clear that it was about to set, and the guests unwittingly made it clear that they were about to leave. Home they all went. Fourth Shun's wife felt dizzy at first, but after a little rest she quietened down. At once, though, she had the impression that things were rather strange. Something which had never happened to her before, and which she had thought never could happen, had happened. The more she thought, the more surprised she felt, and another thing that struck her as rather strange was the fact that the room had suddenly grown too silent. She stood up and lit the lamp, and the room seemed even more silent. She groped her way over to close the door, came back and sat on the bed, while the loom stood silent on the floor. She pulled herself together and looked around, feeling unable either to sit or stand. The room was not only too silent, it was far too big as well, and the things in it were far too empty. This overlarge room hemmed her in, and the emptiness all around her bore hard on her, till she could hardly breathe. She knew now her power was really dead, and not wanting to see this room, she blew out the light and lay down to cry and think. She remembered how Power had sat by her side when she spun, eating peas flavored with aniseed. He had watched her hard with his small black eyes and thought, "Ma," he suddenly said, "Dad sold Hun Thun. When I am big, I'll sell Hun Thun too and make lots and lots of money, and I'll give it all to you." At such times, even every inch of yarn she spun seemed worthwhile and alive. But what now? Fourth Shun's wife had not considered the present at all. As I have said, she was only a simple woman. What solutions could she think of? All she knew was that this room was too silent, too large, too empty. But even though Fourth Shun's wife was a simple woman, she knew the dead cannot come to life again, and she would never see her Power any more. She sighed and said, "Power, you must still be here. Let me see you in my dreams." Then she closed her eyes, hoping to fall asleep at once, so that she could see Power. She heard her heart breathing clearly through the silence, the vastness and emptiness. At last, Fourth Shun's wife dozed off, and the whole room was very still. Red-Nosed Khung's folk song had long since ended, and he had staggered out of Prosperity Tavern to sing in a falsetto, "I pity you, my darling, all alone." Blue-skinned Awu grabbed old Khung's shoulder, and laughingly, tipsily, they reeled away together. Fourth Shun's wife was asleep. Old Khung and the others had gone. The door of Prosperity Tavern was closed. Lǔ Xùn was sunk in utter silence. Only the night, eager to change into tomorrow, was journeying on in the silence. And hidden in the darkness, a few dogs were barking.